Morning, everybody. Happy Election Day. Yasher koach to those who already voted, and hope everyone who did not yet will do so as soon as they're done listening to whether or not I tell you how to vote. And in keeping with Election Day 2024, for those who might be watching this at some other point wondering which election it was, this is entitled Should Rabbis Tell You How to Vote? And suffice it to say, it's not going to be a simple yes or no question. It could be. I think if you had to distill it, it can be very much distilled into a one-word answer. But just to talk a little bit about our civic duty to vote, our religious Torah obligation to vote, as well as how some rabbis have viewed their role in telling people how to vote, endorsing candidates, getting involved in politics. As well as a bit of an extended issue with regards to the role that rabbis play in general when it comes to rabbis weighing in on topics that are not necessarily religious in nature. They call this the idea of das Torah. What is a Torah view of something? And do rabbis have the ability to weigh in or should be listened to on issues that aren't necessarily explicitly religious? And we'll see how that plays out with regards to voting and election and the like. So we're going to dive right in to a headline. This is a headline from last week from the Jewish News Syndicate. It's source number 1 on the sheet. Saltmore Hasidic Rebbe in Kiryas Joel, New York, endorses Trump. Rabbi Aaron Teitelbaum, the influential Saltmore Hasidic Rebbe of Kiryas Joel in upstate New York, announced on Monday that he endorsed former President Donald Trump for president. A mock Satmar ballot, which offered guidance in Yiddish for whom to vote for, provided to JNS, showed votes cast for Democrats in 9 of the 11 federal, state, and local races. However, Trump received Teitelbaum's approval, reportedly following discussions among the leadership of the Hasidic group. An Israeli media report that JNS was unable to verify indicates that Satmar leadership was concerned about the possible implications for Jews if Vice President Kamala Harris becomes president. The news of the Trump endorsement is a marked departure from Teitelbaum's harsh criticism of Trumpism after Election Day in 2022. Trumpism became entangled into the Jewish camp, Teitelbaum said at the time. This Trumpism twisted the minds of so many Yidden, he said, using the Yiddish word for Jews. It brainwashed people, and that's so painful. Aside from Trump, Teitelbaum announced his endorsement on Monday of Representative Pat Ryan, of Democrat of New York. In the 18th Congressional District, Ryan is facing Alison Esposito, a Republican one analysts see as a key race for control of the U.S. House of Representatives. If anyone is in the New York area watching TV on any of the New York stations, I'm sure you've seen dozens of commercials for the Ryan Esposito race, just like you've seen for many other races. I feel like I can recite some of those commercials already by heart. In any event, here we have this idea of a rabbi encouraging followers to vote. In the ultra orthodox and in particular the Hasidic community, sometimes this is the idea that the community's votes are delivered on some level en masse altogether because the Rebbe endorses and everybody follows. This would be taking that concept of das Torah, the Torah religious viewpoint, and those who follow this religious figure really to the extreme that the thousands of votes will follow the way Rabbi Teitelbaum instructs. And we'll see if that actually occurs or not. So that's the rip from the headlines. The election day is today. I would imagine we'll find out tonight. Kiryas Joel probably went very heavily for Trump. We'll probably find out it went very heavily for Pat Ryan as everything is announced. But this idea of clearly Rabbi Teitelbaum thinks he should tell people how to vote. So let's talk a little bit about the responsibility to be involved in civic affairs and elections. We'll discuss it with regards, historically. We'll discuss it in Israel. We'll discuss it in America. And then, as I said, we'll take it into this role, this concept of rabbis weighing in on what can arguably be considered non-religious or Jewish legal issues. So one of the jumping off point for a lot of this discussion is in Pirkei Avot, where Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim Omer, the vice high priest, said, Heve mispalel bishloma shel malchus. Pray for the welfare of the government. You have to pray for the welfare of the government, for if we're not for fear, it inspires every man should swallow his neighbor alive. There is an idea that we need to worry about law and order, and we should be praying for the successful implementation of law and order on the part of the government. Without law and order, we have chaos. So this really is pointed to as the source for the Jews' support for government that is protecting law and order. Right? If it's a government that's oppressing Jews, that's a different story. But this is the idea of praying for the government. This is prayer for the government. The idea of praying for the government in Shul becomes popular on Shabbos. We pray for in different ways: president, vice president, government. I think one of the most surprising prayers for the government was in the 1933 in Germany, in the early days of the after the election of Hitler, Yamach Shemo as chancellor. There were those who prayed for Hitler because he was the head of the government, and it was those early days, and some very lost souls who thought that maybe things would be better, and it was still a democracy and the like. Obviously, things went south very quickly. But the idea is government that's maintaining law and order is deserving of our support. Not only is it about praying for the government, but Rabbi Hirsch understands this as being involved in elections and wanting to be proactively involved in seeing what's called Yishuvo Shel Olam, the settlement in the governance, in the smooth operations of the environment. Source number 3, to be pushed back and limited upon the path of life is therefore not an essential condition of the exile. We shouldn't just, sit back passively. On the contrary, it's our duty to join ourselves as closely as possible to the state which receives us into its midst, to promote its welfare and not consider our well-being as in any way separate from that of the state to which we belong. Right? When it comes to where we live, if we live among a non-Jewish population with a non-Jewish government, we're all in the same boat. Right? Quite literally, that's the example that's brought with regards to the necessity of treating others with respect. We're all in the same boat. I can't make a hole under my seat, because if I make a hole under my seat, the whole boat is going to sink. And so we are all literally in the same boat, and Rabbi Hirsch sees this as part of a religious responsibility. We have our Torah obligations, our Jewish responsibilities, and we feel as if, and we declare and believe and treat others as creating the image of God, but there's also isn't just in the abstract for us to sit back and watch as things unfold. We have to get involved, and we have to worry about the environment in which we live. And in many ways, the most fundamental way to be involved in this is to vote and to have a government that functions well with the right people represented. And our activity in that is to vote. And we see this expressed as being a religious responsibility. There's a popular story told about the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish was the leader of what's now the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva camp in Israel in the early days of the state. He passed away in 1953. Source number 4. A man once asked Rabbi Avram Yeshua Karelitz whether he should vote or not. The Chazon Ish answered him clearly that he should vote. On election day, the Chazon Ish saw the questioner and asked him, "Did you vote yet?" The man answered he had not. "Why not?" the Chazon Ish continued to ask. "I don't have enough money to cover the voting tax," the man responded. "Do you own a pair of tefillin?" the Chazon Ish persisted. "Of course," the man replied. The Chazon Ish responded, "You should sell your tefillin and pay the taxes. Tefillin you can borrow from another, but the right to vote you cannot get from someone else." And so the story is told. It was told by someone who knew the Chazon Ish from Bnei Brak, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own. Right, the Chazon Ish, an ultra-Orthodox rabbi. This story is quoted by non-Orthodox and Reform and secular Jews to highlight the importance of voting across the board. But it demonstrates this idea that there's a religious responsibility to vote, and you have to take control of that. Chazon Ish is telling the person, you don't need to own tefillin. You have to own your opportunity to vote, and you have to do it because only you can do it yourself, and that it becomes something that is important. And then so we see this also. Chazon Ish is a voice in Israel, getting involved in the Israeli election, the Jewish state. When we talk about the American scene, one of the most popularly and often invoked sentiments is from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, from a letter in 1984. And if anyone is on social media, this was all over Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. People putting the picture of the letter. It was written in English, signed by Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. On reaching the shores of the United States, Jews found a safe haven. The rights guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights have allowed us the freedom to practice our religion without interference and to live in this republic in safety. A fundamental principle of Judaism is hakarat hatov, recognizing benefits afforded us and giving expression to our appreciation. Therefore, it is incumbent upon each Jewish citizen to participate in the democratic system which guards the freedoms we enjoy. The most fundamental responsibility incumbent on each individual is to register and to vote. By this, we can express our appreciation and contribute to the continued security of our community, right? Capturing the sentiments of Chanina Skan Kohanim to pray for the government. It's religious, capturing Rav Hirsch's to be involved in the betterment of society. You have to vote, especially recognizing the unique opportunities we have in the United States. It's an expression of gratitude, being a good citizen, etc. So just with the presenting of the issue, we'll just stop any questions, comments, reactions, when we dig a little bit more deeply into some of, okay, we have to vote, but what should be some of the motivations and influences? Is it with a civic lens? Is it with a religious lens? And the like. Questions, comments, reactions?
Rabbi, you in your emails to vote, you use the word mitzvah.
Yeah.
Isn't that a little loose? I mean, to call it a mitzvah, I understand what you've been saying.
I would say it's a little bit tight. I'm saying there's religious significance to do it. It's not just a nice thing to do; it's an obligation. If you don't vote, you're going to have to explain why not when you get to the heavenly tribunal.
Okay.
And look, the Chazon Ish says it's more important than owning a pair of tefillin. He didn't say it's more important than putting on tefillin. He just said it's that you don't need to own tefillin, but you do need to own your vote. So this is, and in general, when you talk about things loosely, if I don't have to do it, then why should I do it? So I think that these are things, this is a civic responsibility and a religious obligation to take part in ensuring society is better. So no one says you can be a trustee of a village or a city councilman or a senator, but you could help elect the right people. Now, how do you start understanding right? And is there anything to inform that decision from a religious perspective? It's a mitzvah to vote, but is it a mitzvah to vote for a certain candidate? And in terms of the motivation that we have, is that also informed religiously or not? The story of the Chazon Ish and Rabbi Feinstein, no, you have to vote because you have to vote because that's what Jews are supposed to do to participate in society. But what shapes the vote, or what is the sentiment behind that vote, is now something we'll flesh out a little bit from a couple of voices and anecdotes and recollections and reflections. So source number 6, an article on Ami magazine. I remember how in old times people were happy they were able to go on the streets with a shtreimel and not be pelted with stones and eggs. I wasn't brought up in a community that was trying to impose Jewish values on others. Rather, we're very happy to preserve our Yiddishkeit and practice it in this Medina Shel Chesed, country of kindness. I spoke to Rav Ruvain Feinstein, that's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's son. He told me that Rav Moshe did not believe that family values would outweigh a politician's support for yeshivas. So Rabbi Frankfurter is talking about voting with a little bit of communal self-interest, and communal self-interest is more of a priority than values. Right? He's saying if you have Rav Moshe report was reported to say that it doesn't matter, let's say, what the person's views are on family values, in 2024 terms, abortion. It's not as important what the views on abortion are as opposed to the politician's support for yeshivos, the communal self-interest. And there's very much is in line with what we think, very much in line with the sentiment that's being expressed when Rabbi Teitelbaum is telling his Hasidim who to vote for. It's about communal self-interest. He's splitting the ticket. Trump for president, Ryan the Democrat for Congress. It really doesn't matter what their ideology is. We're voting for, in a way, communal self-interest. And that's significant because sometimes one would say, take that and translate that to 2024 election today. Are you voting for the candidate based on their social policies, their foreign policies, their fiscal policies. There can be many of them, but we see that in the, at least in this sentiment expressed through Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, that if you have two competing values, deciding to vote for communal self-interest is okay, even if their social policies might be against Jewish law, or their family values be against the traditional Jewish approach. So you have, with regards to, there's a mitzvah and obligation to vote, and if you're looking for religious guidance in how to vote, communal self-interest is part of it. Now, Rabbi Jeremy Weider, who's Rosh Yeshiva, one of the rabbis at Yeshiva University, in a talk in 2016 about voting, in terms of the importance in voting, politicians pay attention to who votes, and this is a very, very serious issue. It's important that everybody who can vote, especially younger people, because even the politicians know that they're going to win the state, they'll pay attention to the demographics that are voting. It's, on some level, it's important for the community to have a voice, for the community to have influence. It's he's not saying specifically has to be vote based on self-interest. You have to vote. The self-interest is ensuring that the community maintains its voice, in a way that large constituencies are known to have more influence. Candidates will pay attention to those who have the ability to vote. There was an article in the New York Jewish Week, JTA, just today, talking about the Crown Heights Jewish community and how the number of votes cast there has doubled, and there's still 5,000 unregistered voters there. And it's not so much about necessarily the idea that even if, let's say, people would think that in the Crown Heights Hasidic community, people lean Republican, it's not about party. It's about knowing that the constituency is a significant one and they vote in great numbers. You want to, Rabbi Weider is pointing out the value is to make sure that the community has a voice. The Jewish community needs a voice, so therefore the Jewish community has to vote. Who they vote for is less significant. He's not saying it's about particular self-interest or religious values, but it's important to have a vote, to have a voice. Rabbi Frankfurter in his article then talks about what about the quality of the candidate. And so he quotes the article, Rabbi Frankfurter's article quotes Rabbi Meyer Schwab. Rabbi Meyer Schwab was the son of Rabbi Shimon Schwab. Shimon Schwab was the leader of the Breuers community in Washington Heights in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and after Rabbi Breuer. For those who aren't familiar, in Washington Heights, Upper Manhattan, is a large community of Jews who originated in Germany. In the early 20th century, some moved into that neighborhood, and after World War II, those German Jews who came to America very much were drawn to that community. And it's a unique community we've spoken about before, influenced by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who we talked about in an earlier source. So this is quoting a sentiment of Rabbi Schwab from that community. If it would come out that the frum Jews voted for and put into office someone whose behavior was despicable by all standards of humanity, that decent people everywhere consider abominable, if it became known that the frum Jews of Borough Park or Monsey or New York voted for him, it would be a Chil Hashem, and a Chil Hashem trumps everything. Interesting to have Chil Hashem trumps everything in one phrase. I'll leave that to everyone's political opinions, but the idea here is that it makes a difference. If someone is a Chilul Hashem, then if Jews are known to vote for that, Chilul Hashem, that is a terrible terrible offense on the part of the Jewish community for voting for someone who is an abomination. Decent people everywhere consider abominable. Now, these days, decent people, abominable, terms like deplorable, terms like garbage, they all have kind of different meaning depending on which side of the fence you are on. I think Rabbi Schwab is talking about a time when there was a little less political polarization out there. I don't know. The other night there was a documentary about Ronald Reagan on, and I'm thinking to myself, I'd vote for him this year too. But it was a different time. But here we see that really who the Jews support is also important. They can't be someone who represents who decent people everywhere consider abominable. Now, I think we probably lost the ability for a kind of unanimous verdict on that description, but the idea of a Jewish community supporting someone abominable is a chil Hashem. Maybe that's probably why you don't see Jews for David Duke back in the day. But here we see that we've seen several voices. One, communal self-interest. Two, important for there to be a Jewish voice. Three, there is kind of an aspirational element in who we vote for, which also plays a role. And I think a lot of this plays out in contemporary times. We're going to look at sources 9 and 10, two rabbis who weighed in 2020 in terms of who should Jews vote for. Some of you may have seen reported on in the media or on social media lists of rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, one list supporting Harris, one list supporting Trump. So it's still a little too early, and let's go back to the last election when this similar schism or fracture within the Orthodox community, like in the American population, played out. And it gets to the heart of the matter in terms of the idea of rabbis weighing in. Should rabbis weigh in? Should rabbis endorse political candidates? So source number 9, Rabbi Barry Kornblau, who is a Orthodox rabbi, used to be in Queens, made Aliyah in the last 4 years. And he wrote an article, Why Orthodox Jews Should Vote for Biden. Source number 9, the psalmist instructs us to trust no prince. From a secular perspective, too, no candidate is ever perfect. Nonetheless, God has blessed each American with the privilege and duty to pick a candidate on the ballot. We American Jews who bear the torch of Torah observance must consider the stark differences between this year's presidential candidates and not hesitate to vote for Joe Biden. You can read the whole article and you can imagine the different issues that are discussed, whether it be the morality of the candidates or their public pronouncements and their personalities and their economic policies and their Israel policies. And that was the side that Rabbi Kornblau came down on. Another view was Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg. Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg is a very prominent and popular rabbi in Boca Raton, a friend of mine and someone who has a lot to say on a lot of issues. But when it comes to voting, as an Orthodox rabbi, I will not tell you how to vote, and neither should anyone else. And this also, again, was written in advance of the last election. Rabbi Kornblau and Rabbi Goldberg did a debate online together. That's available also online if you want to look for it. Basically summarizes their positions that are in the articles. But this is Rabbi Goldberg. And Rabbi Goldberg will also be a good springboard to discussing this idea of Das Torah and rabbis weighing in on issues, or whether what would seem to be secular issues also have religious slants. I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and let me be clear, as an Orthodox rabbi, I'm not telling you who you must vote for. If Torah interpretation has 70 faces, and halacha is driven by the principle Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, these and these are the words of the living God, contradictory opinions are both the word of the living God, then certainly in politics, lahavdil, reasonable, thoughtful, respectful people can come to opposing conclusions. While I will continue to defer and submit to great Rosh Yeshiva and Talmidei Chachamim on matters of halacha and hashkafa, Jewish thought and belief, I don't want them, no matter how prominent they may be, to decree whom I must vote for. Diagnose the mental status of either candidate, tell me they know with certainty who is better for the Jewish people or Israel, or to oversimplify what is a truly complicated choice. What disturbs me most about rabbinic declarations dictating how we vote and articulating with complete confidence what will happen if we don't is not just the unfair denial of people to think for themselves and draw their own legitimate conclusions, but is also, I believe it is also a significant departure from an important Torah principle. Right? There's the rabbis don't have the ability to declare with certainty and certainly for decide for other people who is right, who is wrong when it comes to candidates, because that's something that is much deeper and more complicated than issues of Jewish law or even Jewish belief. especially because candidates are part of a wider network of parties or the areas of government in which they are being elected to. It's not simple. Rabbi Meir Twersky, who was a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University, is also the grandson of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, has more of a philosophical approach to this. Source number 11. It is incongruous and thus wrong to campaign as Jews for John Doe, whereas religious moral values can and should determine how we vote. Ultimately, voting is a political act. This is so because of the need to politically assess which candidate will best advance those values. Given the variability and individuality of perception and judgment, it's commonplace that people with the same vision nonetheless disagree in their political assessments of competing candidates. Sound familiar to anybody? Thus, voting remains very much a political act, and for this reason, it is entirely incongruous and thus wrong for us to identify ourselves as Jews for John Doe. Right? Those Jews for Harris and Jews for Trump were out there clearly did not ask Rabbi Meir Twersky. And Rabbi Twersky continues, I believe this is why my grandfather, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, steadfastly refused to give political endorsements. When we venture outside the realm of Torah and yet speak in her name, we politicize Torah. This can never be countenanced. And so here too, Rabbi Twersky is starting to head us into the discussion, into the conversation about where is the line of demarcation for things which we traditionally ask rabbis for a lot of different things. Is there a limit to the rabbinic view on certain issues? We think Judaism and Torah is all-encompassing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is appropriate for there to be a declarative rabbinic opinion or a rabbinic prerogative for people to follow that opinion in certain areas. And it seems, especially when it comes to election voting in politics, that certainly is one of those areas. We'll pivot into a little bit of a discussion about this idea of Das Torah. We'll stop for any questions or comments.
Rabbi, I always thought that a religious institution is at risk of losing its tax-exempt status if election preferences are given out by the clergy. Can you address that, please?
So, yes, 501c3 institutions are not supposed to be political, so there's a risk. Now, there's a risk walking out of your front door every morning. So it's a question of whether or not rabbis and institutions will take that risk. 501c3s are allowed to promote positions on issues, so to say things, pro-Israel, making pro-Israel type statements, or even to make or to make comments on, in New York State, they're voting on Proposition 1, whether that fits in with the religious values of an institution is allowed, because it's not about a candidate, it's about a topic. So it is a gray area, and I would say it's probably a way for rabbis to avoid talking about specific candidates, in addition to all the other downsides of doing so, as we've seen expressed by Rabbi Goldberg and Rabbi Twersky, and how that we know what would happen in the places where the politics may get too overt and too extreme. We can't talk about it because we're a religious institution. There are certainly religious institutions, synagogues, churches, that are known for being much more politically direct and active. But as you point out, there's a risk, but it's a risk that they're willing to take.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Otherwise, we'll pivot to Das Torah, the Torah viewpoint, regarding other things which may not necessarily be considered religious issues. So we'll look at Agudath Israel. Agudath Israel of America, kind of the umbrella organization of the Torah world, yeshiva, Hasidic communities, although that's a bit of an oversimplification. Agudath Israel is known for being very politically active and on issues relevant to the communities, and very much, I would say, embodying what Rabbi Feinstein said about being involved in elections, being involved politically, and also having a certain element of self-interest in that political involvement. They're also very much driven by what's called their Council of Torah Sages, the Moetzes Gedolei Torah. And in describing this, in their history, source number 12, other movements might relegate their Torah authorities to the study hall and leave practical matters to its secular leaders. Agudath Israel referred all important matters to the Torah authorities and honored its lay leaders with the task of carrying out the policies defined by the Das Torah, the Torah viewpoint, the Torah intuition of the sages. Indeed, Agudath Israel was created only to be the executive and organizational arm of Das Torah. Agudath Israel, the rabbis decide and the lay people carry it out to implement the concept that Torah is relevant in every area of Jewish concern. So the idea that they want a Torah voice on everything, and that's expressed by the rabbis, and it's really expressed on all things. It's not just about Torah and Shabbos and kosher, it's also about communal priorities and about the role of technology in Jewish law. You name it, the rabbis weigh in for Das Torah. Now, this can be taken to the extreme, and you may be thinking about situations you have heard of or read about where people turn to their rabbis for all sorts of questions, even those that seem to be far beyond any type of religious significance. So Rabbi Alfred Cohen has an article about this concept, Das Torah, in the Journal of Halacha Contemporary Society, also known as the RJJ Journal. It is not uncommon today for pious, sincere individuals to ask the rabbi's advice on questions from the sublime to the ridiculous, having nothing to do with either halacha or ideology, but of a practical and mundane character. I've personally been assured by a very sincere individual that a truly religious person will ask his rabbi what color to paint his house, whether to purchase a new car, whether to undertake a new business venture, and the like. Others have a more circumscribed list of topics in which they feel rabbinic advice is required. Right? There's something to be said for asking a rabbi, right? We quoted Pirkei Avos before with regards to praying for the government. It says, Aseluch Harav, have a teacher. What's that teacher supposed to teach you about? Is it just, areas specific of Jewish law, or are you looking for a guide? But this idea of Das Torah has been taken to the extreme by some people in some parts of the community, mostly found in the more ultra-Orthodox Haredi Hasidic parts of the community. We started by talking about the Chazon Ish and voting in Israel. Harry Marilis, who is a blogger, addressed the issue of that. It's strange because if the ultra-Orthodox community really followed their rabbinic leadership and only voted for ultra-Orthodox parties, the ultra-Orthodox community would have far greater representation in the Israeli Knesset. So there's a discussion that's been noted and written about exactly how does that happen. Here's a community that says the rabbis decide, and the rabbis decide and tell everyone to vote for certain parties, yet those parties are underperforming. How does that happen? So Harry Marilis writes in a blog post from a couple of years ago, source 14, the question is, how can a card-carrying member of the Haredi world who believes that one must follow Das Torah decide to go against it by voting for other parties? Right? Will there be any Harris voters in Kiryas Joel? I think the answer might be quite revealing. Apparently, many Haredim follow Das Torah for social reasons. They do not want to lose their Haredi credentials. Given the opportunity to think for themselves without being caught, many of them do. Right? In the voter booth, no one's going to know who you vote for. You'll vote for who you feel is a better candidate. And in some ways, this idea of Das Torah may be taken to the extreme by many. It may be the umbrella ethos or worldview of an Agudath Yisrael, which is taking the rabbinic view and having the lay people carry it out, but there's always going to be something different in its implementation. Conceptually, the rabbis can weigh in on everything, and you have to listen to the rabbis. Practically speaking, the further away you get from the rabbinic decision, as well as the greater the anonymity that may be allowed in expressing that decision or acting upon that decision, you may find a softening of the rabbinic voice, the rabbinic dictate, and such. Just in terms of the idea that this Das Torah is something that's part of the ultra-Orthodox or Hasidic ethos, naturally, there's a letter from Rabbi Shner Zalman of Ladi, source number 15. He was the founding Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe of the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim. And he was writing about people coming to him asking for business advice. Come now, let us reason together. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Was there ever anything like this? Where then did you find such a custom in any of the books of any of the Chachmei Yisrael, Rishonim or Achronim, early or late authorities, that there should be a praiseworthy custom to ask for worldly counsel as to what to do with respect to secular matters of even great Chachmei Yisrael, such as Tanaim or Amoraim, right? Do we ever see in the Mishnah people asking business advice of the sages? To whom no secret was foreign, to whom the byways of heaven were familiar. They were really holy people. I mean, we believe that they had a direct line to heaven. It's kind of the rabbinic idea that the generations are in decline, the Yeridat Hadorot. So the rabbis 2,000 years ago had a much more direct religious or spiritual inspiration to know what was the right thing to do. And people didn't ask them for business advice. Right? Prophets were the only thing higher than those rabbis, and no one asked them for business advice. So why are they asking me for business advice? For in truth, all human matters, except for those of Torah and Yirat Shamayim, are grasped by prophecy alone. And bread is not to the wise, as Chazal said, everything is in the hands of heaven, except for fear of heaven. Rabbis don't have any better opinions when it comes to advice than anybody else. The only certain thing, the prophets know, when it comes to the rabbis, you could talk to them about religious matters, but not about secular matters. And so it's an interesting Hasidic voice weighing in on the limitations of that rabbinic authority or that Das Torah to be binding. Again, you want a guide, you want some information, and I think people genuinely look to rabbis for spiritual guidance, and sometimes they're willing to take their advice if they're more spiritually inclined than other more practical advice. But that's not something that's natural to the Jewish condition. Aaron Rakefet Rothkopf, Rabbi Rakefet, who's a longtime educator based in Jerusalem, originally from Yeshiva University, who's written extensively on this subject and also about Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, quotes from Rabbi Soloveitchik in his book, The Rav, source 16. I resent very much when certain Rosh Yeshiva and certain teachers want to impose their will upon the boys. This is the Rav speaking. It is against the law. Both ways are correct. The opinions are correct. It is up to the individual to make the decision. This is very much the idea that the Rav felt people have to make up their own minds on issues that don't have necessarily objective or final religious determinations. Kosher, not kosher, might be something that is more objective. Although I will point out a footnote for those who are interested in the laws of kosher. Hopefully everyone is interested in the laws of kosher and keeps those laws of kosher. There are some differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. And one of those has to do with the status of Pyrex. And Pyrex for Ashkenazim is considered more like pottery, and for Sephardim is considered more like glass. So the question that was asked was, someone has a meat Pyrex dish that is always normally used for meat, and they cooked, they made a meat stew in the Pyrex dish, and then 12 hours later they made macaroni and cheese in the Pyrex dish. So it's using a meat dish for hot dairy food, cooking hot dairy food in it, and the Pyrex is something that you can't really kosher. So what's the status? Now, for Ashkenazim, it's stuck. You can't use it anymore. There's no way of really koshering it on the surface. However, for Sephardim, this dish is considered glass. So all of a sudden, here's something that's not kosher for the Ashkenazi. Pass it on to the Sephardi, and it might be kosher. So we talk about objective halacha. Halacha isn't always about reality; it's about the halachic reality. Ad kan, the kosher side point. But in any event, the Rav says if it's a decision, is it this politician or that politician, you have to decide. There are certainly important religious values that are part of that. But as he says, both ways are correct. The options are correct. It's up to the individual to make the decision. And in the worldview of Rabbi Soloveitchik, many look back to the Shoah and the destruction of Eastern European Jewry as a turning point, because this idea of the Das Torah, of the rabbis being able to advise or their advice being followed on more worldly or political matters, emerged in the early 20th century. That's when Agudat Israel was founded. That's also the beginning of the Zionist movement. And there was a major backlash against the Zionist movement by the more traditionalist movement. And this, played out especially as from the teens in the 20s and the 1930s when it came to should we move to Israel. Religious Zionism was founded in 1902, the Mizrahi movement, and there was a push, let's go to Israel. And many non-Mizrahi traditionalist rabbis, Agudath Israel rabbis, said, no, stay in Europe. Fast forward to the Shoah, and that was terrible advice in retrospect. And the Rabbi Soloveitchik touches upon this in terms of in one of his speeches to the Mizrahi, which is collected in a book called The Rav Speaks. It was 5 addresses that the Rav gave to the Mizrahi, and he's telling the speech, the sermon was about Joseph and his brothers representing different worldviews, and ultimately Joseph was correct. So God handed over, source 17, God handed over technical legal matters to the authority of the sages to rule on what is clean and what is unclean, to decide between obligation and exemption, forbidden and permitted. But in historical questions, those relating to the destiny of the eternal people, God himself decides as to whose interpretation shall become the law. This, which historical development is accurate. Nor can anyone dispute the ruling of God in this domain. In the controversy between Joseph of yore and his brothers thousands of years ago, God decided in accordance with Joseph's interpretation of the historical process in terms of going down to Egypt and the role that they were going to play there. In our days, and the Rav's talking about in the 50s and 60s, the creator of the universe similarly decided that the historical law will be as the Joseph of 5662, 1902, the religious Zionists had predicated. In accordance with the view of him who had little faith in the future of East European Jewry and who dreamed of another land and other conditions. I would like to ask a simple question. What would the yeshiva and Torah scholars rescued from the Holocaust, those burning embers taken from the fire, have done if the Joseph of 5662 had not trod a path for them in the land of Israel and that made possible the transplanting of the tree of life of Lithuania in other lands in the Holy Land? What would the Eastern European traditionalist Agudath Israel, ultra-Orthodox, do if it hadn't been for the religious Zionists in 1902 moving forward to settle in the land and create an environment that would be welcoming to the embers of the Holocaust? And the Rav was very adamant in this. And this was a change from the Rav's original viewpoints. The Rav grew up in a very much Agudath Israel influence viewpoint in Eastern Europe. But the development of history proved that the Mizrahi was right. As mentioned in Rabbi Daniel Idenson's blog, and this is a blog that's called Das Torah, certainly a way to get attention, and it's October 20th, 08. It's in the comments on the blog. Regarding Rav Soloveitchik's views, Rabbi Rekefa told me that as a result of the Holocaust, Rav Soloveitchik came to the realization that many lives were lost because of the lack of independent thought. Therefore, he came to the view that it was important not to blindly follow the views of Gedolim, the great rabbis, and that one should use his own seichel, his own mind. So the idea of the rabbi's track record on matters that are beyond the immediate expertise is not 100% successful. And so there's recognizing that there are issues that rabbis can weigh in on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their opinions are binding or any better than anyone else's opinion. Now, I just wanted to conclude with a thought by Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein. Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein is the son-in-law of Rabbi Soloveitchik. He was born, educated in America, Yeshiva University, and in Harvard, and then went to co-found Yeshivat Har Etzion in Israel, one of the premier religious Zionist institutions, a Hesder Yeshiva. He had a PhD in literature, so we're talking about someone who was very eloquent and very worldly. While we're saying that the rabbis are not necessarily the ones to listen to when it comes to voting or whether to stay in Europe or other issues that aren't necessarily anchored in text or Jewish law, we do recognize the role of the Torah sage. Getting back to what we mentioned before, the idea of Aselach Harav, having a teacher, having a guide. We value those who are learned and knowledgeable in Judaism and in Torah, to rely upon them as having a certain amount of intuition, and that being valid for us to turn to if we want. What the Rav is pushing back on, and is seen with regards to Rabbi Goldberg and Rabbi Twersky with regards to voting, is this idea that rabbis tell you how to vote is a religious positive. We're seeing at the same time rabbis, in defense of rabbis, and in defense of the role of rabbis, Rabbi Lichtenstein points out, Nevertheless, beyond reservations, I find the alternate view that Gedolei Torah are professional experts whose authority and wisdom can ordinarily be regarded as confined to the area of their technical proficiency. Right? You can only listen to rabbis about Torah. Simply inconceivable. Our abiding historical faith in the efficacy of Torah as a pervasive, ennobling, informing, and enriching force dictates adoption of the concept of dot Torah in some form or measure. We believe that those who are spokespeople for Torah, those whose professional lives and their intellectual lives are steeped in Torah, have what to say on other issues, because we believe that the Torah is intertwined in everything in life. Doesn't mean that the rabbi tells you who to vote for, or whether to stay or whether to go, or whether to paint your house red or blue. But having that religious relationship is significant. I guess I could acknowledge that there's a little self-interest in this, if for a rabbi to make that kind of a statement. As I always say, my favorite verses in the Torah is that whatever the rabbis say, you have to listen left or right. But there is that we don't want this to be about that if the rabbis aren't telling you who to vote for, that the rabbis are just like everyone else. We believe that those who have more Torah are deserving of that additional respect and attention because of that Torah, even if what the topic under discussion isn't necessarily one that the rabbinic view is binding upon. So, should rabbis tell you how to vote? I think that I tend to side with the Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Twersky side of things, that it's not the place for rabbis to be publicly politicking. Happy to discuss the issues about an election publicly. Happy to discuss the pros and cons of candidates more quietly, because in larger settings that sometimes gets taken the wrong way. I thought that I would end with my endorsement just as I ended the Zoom. So you have to be like, what do you say? But we'll end with a hope that that we continue to follow a religious and a serious path, and that hopefully our country continues to abide by its democratic values. People should vote and support those democratic values, and we'll continue to pray for the government that hopefully it takes action and follows policies, as we say every Shabbos, that enable our people, all Americans, and all humanity to live in a world of safety, blessing, freedom, and peace. And let us say, Amen.